A billionaire CEO, his autistic son, and the waitress who changed everything, airports, boardrooms, and luxury penthouses, were the usual settings of Alexander Kane's life. At just 50, he was the billionaire CEO of Kane Global Holdings, a multinational empire spanning technology, finance, and energy. To the world, he was the definition of success: sharp jawline, tailored navy suits, and a mind that turned everything it touched into gold. But success had not given him what he wanted most: connection with his son, his only child. Ethan was 12 years old. Bright, sensitive, and deeply observant, Ethan was autistic. He loved numbers, trains, and lining up his toy cars in perfect symmetry. Words didn't come easily, but when he spoke, they carried a strange kind of purity. Yet, to Alexander, his son remained a mystery. Board meetings and mergers made sense. Profit and loss spoke his language. But when Ethan sat silently at the dinner table, refusing to meet his father's eyes, Kane felt powerless. He tried the typical billionaire solutions: expensive therapists, elite schools, even a private communication coach. But the harder he tried to fix things, the more distant Ethan became. The boy's mother had left years earlier, worn down by the endless pressure of living in Kane's shadow. Now it was just father and son, living under the same roof but in two different worlds. One Friday evening, exhausted after a week of negotiations in New York, Alexander decided to take Ethan to a quiet, upscale restaurant in Manhattan. The maitre d' recognized him instantly, pulling out chairs with exaggerated politeness. Other diners glanced over, whispering. Cameras clicked on phones, but Ethan, overwhelmed by the lights and chatter, covered his ears and began rocking slightly. Kane stiffened. He hated attention when it wasn't controlled. "Ethan, sit still," he whispered harshly, trying to maintain his public image. That's when she appeared, a waitress named Maya Johnson. She was young, in her mid-20s, wearing a simple black uniform. Her voice was soft, almost musical, and her dark eyes held no judgment. Instead of addressing Kane first, she crouched down beside Ethan. "Hey there," she said gently. "Do you like puzzles? I've got a menu here with pictures. You want to help me find the trains on it?" Ethan's eyes flickered with interest. Slowly, he nodded. Maya slid him a children's menu, not something Kane had even noticed was offered in such a high-end place. Ethan picked up a crayon and began circling shapes, his shoulders relaxing. For the first time that evening, the boy smiled. Alexander sat frozen, unsure whether to feel grateful or insulted. No one ever bypassed him to focus on his son, but something in Maya's simple act cracked his polished armor. As the evening unfolded, Alexander couldn't stop watching Maya. She didn't treat Ethan like a burden or a problem to solve. She treated him like a person. She spoke softly, gave him space, and never once pressured him to look her in the eye. When Ethan became overstimulated by the clatter of dishes, Maya discreetly dimmed the light above their table and moved them to a quieter corner. She didn't make a scene. She simply saw what the boy needed. By the time dessert arrived, Ethan was giggling softly at something Maya had drawn on a napkin, a simple sketch of a train. Alexander, however, was unsettled. "Why did you do all that?" he asked when Maya returned with the check. She shrugged. "Because he needed it. Because everyone deserves to feel safe in a space like this." Her words pierced him. For years, Alexander had built a world where efficiency, profit, and control mattered above all. But here was a waitress, someone society might overlook, teaching him what true connection looked like. The truth about Maya. The next week, Alexander returned to the restaurant alone. He needed answers. He asked to speak with Maya during her break. Reluctantly, she sat down. "Why did you help my son that way?" he pressed. Maya hesitated. Then she told him the truth. Her younger brother Jordan was also autistic. Growing up in a working-class black family in Harlem, resources were scarce. Therapies and programs Kane could buy without blinking had always been out of reach. Maya had learned how to support her brother with patience, creativity, and love, because no one else would. "I see kids like Ethan all the time," she said quietly. People look past them. Or worse, they judge them. But my brother taught me something important. Being seen can change everything. For once, Alexander had no response. He, the man who always had answers, sat speechless. A corporate mirror over. The next months, Alexander began to visit the restaurant often. Sometimes with Ethan, sometimes alone. Slowly, a friendship grew between him and Maya. She had no interest in his wealth or status. In fact, she often challenged him in ways no one dared. One evening, when Kane complained about how hard it was to connect with Ethan, Maya looked him square in the eye. "Maybe the problem isn't Ethan," she said. "Maybe the problem is that you're trying to make him fit into your world." Instead of stepping into his, the words hit, harder than any boardroom criticism. But Maya's influence didn't stop at Kane's personal life. During a casual conversation, she mentioned how her brother had been rejected from jobs repeatedly, not because of lack of skill, but because companies refuse to accommodate neurodiverse workers. "You run one of the biggest corporations in the world," she said. "Do you have programs for people like him? Or do you shut the door too?" Alexander went home that night unable to sleep. For the first time, he realized his company, the empire he had built, was part of the very injustice Maya spoke of. Transformation in the months that followed. A quiet revolution began inside Kane Global Holdings. With Maya's guidance, Alexander launched a neurodiversity hiring initiative, creating training programs, sensory-friendly workplaces, and mentorship opportunities for autistic and differently abled employees. He also introduced scholarships for underprivileged families seeking therapies for their children, families like Maya's, who had been overlooked for so long. But the biggest change was at home. Instead of trying to mold Ethan into a reflection of himself, Alexander began stepping into Ethan's world. He sat with him on the floor, lining up toy cars. He rode the subway with him just to watch the trains. He listened, not to fix, but to understand. One evening, as they sat side by side building a model train track, Ethan looked up and whispered, "Dad." "You're my friend," tears filled Alexander's eyes. In that single moment, he realized all the billions in the world couldn't compare to the gift of being truly seen by his son. The power of being seen. Months later, Alexander stood on stage at a global conference, announcing his company's new initiatives. Cameras flashed. Investors leaned forward. But this time, his voice carried something money couldn't buy: humility. Behind the stage, in the quiet wings, stood Maya. She hadn't wanted recognition, but he insisted she be there. When the applause erupted, he turned not to the cameras, but to her. "You changed everything," he said simply. And in that moment, it wasn't about a billionaire CEO or a waitress. It was about two human beings, a boy, and the truth that connection has no price tag. Because sometimes, the greatest revolutions don't start in boardrooms. They start at a dinner table, with a quiet waitress who refuses to look past a child, and that is the power of being seen.